Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I am one of your hosts, Derick. With me is Evan. Good day to you, sir.
Good day to you, sir.
All right, Genesis 3:6. This is part 2 of our exploration of that, so I'll read it again just to remind us. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. This part poses some questions, namely, why did the woman give the fruit to the man? That's that's interesting. What was that about? And I don't know. There's a bunch of things, a bunch of possible reasons. But I think one way of looking at this, right, is that there is something in the sort of feminine instinct to try and shape the world in a way that has a kind of equity to it, where people are sort of on the same level, right? In part because that allows for sort of more security, right? Mm-hmm. If people are sort of equal and even and on the same level, then you don't have people trying to climb up to bring people down or climb up to get over people or all of that, right? Mm-hmm. One of the ways I could describe this or sort of show this is if we think about a bad day, right? If someone has a bad day, the response to that is that the masculine instinct broods, mm-hmm. and the feminine instinct rampages, right? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean men do one or women do the other. Generally, maybe it leans one way or not. But I think...
Do you mean rant?
No, rampages. I mean, if one is having a bad day, mm-hmm. and they let their feminine instinct determine their response, uh-huh. that is the instinct from which you behave sharply and meanly and
mm-hmm. Okay.
In a way, you bring everyone down to the same level you are, right? There's a way in which if I'm having a bad day and I let the feminine instinct within me guide me, mm-hmm. then I'm very bothered by anyone who's having a good day, mm-hmm. right? They better come down to my level. That's an issue. If I'm having a bad day and someone else is having a good day, no, that's no good. Whereas if I let my masculine instinct, take control, then it's sort of a withdrawal from things, right?
It's a quit from the world entirely.
Yeah, it's go and hide.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those two things is so I think the idea of giving the fruit to the man is in part related to that idea of, well, this only works if we both share this newfound knowledge or wisdom or whatever she thought it was, right? That it's sort of, everyone needs to have that, right? Yeah. Some people having more knowledge than others is potentially dangerous. Yeah. And it kind of is too, in life, I mean, that there is a sense in which, it has been good for humanity as a whole, the invention of books, right? Mm-hmm. Or even the internet and the sort of what they call the democratization of information. And it's a terrible term, but the idea that they're getting at is that information is more broadly available, and generally that's probably a better thing, actually.
Well, and inequality is oftentimes very unstable,
right?
But that is despite what you think about inequality or the broader economic structures inherent in that, it is unstable when inequality exists, and there's only so much that societies typically can bear before there are outrages around it, and and that can cause societies to crumble if it gets to a point where it's not checked by some sort of mechanism,
right?
I tend to take this as another aspect, and maybe it's both aspect of the feminine, of being the feminine, the more social instinct.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Wanting to share
The
too, of
feminine.
course. Yeah.
Yeah, that there's more
I would
and
say
we
in
we
part
talked about
I
this
would say
last
the
time we
instinct to
introduced.
share and the instinct to socialize, I think that actually creates the equity.
Yeah,
Though.
yeah, but there's in the feminine, and we've talked about this in the past too, so we won't rehash it totally in previous episodes, but we have talked about how the feminine tends to be more in tune to social structures, whereas masculine tends to not, and we see that in men and women. Again, we're bouncing between the biological and the
Right.
perspective, or the
Yeah.
more abstract perspective here, but women tend to be far more in tune socially and far more concerned with people, whereas men broadly tend to be far more concerned with things, and not as concerned with people. And that probably does lead to that higher being more in tune with inequities, because if you're just concerned with things, you don't notice inequity.
Well, even
you don't care.
Yeah,
because you don't notice it, you don't care about it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, that could be a part of this too. I mean, there's I think the main point, though, to take away from it, all of that aside, is the reason the woman gives the fruit to the man is there's something in the feminine instinct that needed to share that, right?
Yeah.
That needed that to be, with the masculine as well, I guess. So then that gives us another question, which we should ask is, why does the man take and eat it? Right. And this goes to lots of people have filled in so much of that story, right? As to, clearly this must have been happened, or she must have done something to tempt him. I think, was it Augustine who said something about it being like she tempted him with sex, or I can't remember if that was Augustine or someone else, but that's been proposed before that's what it was. But it's more
powerful that there's no temptation,
right? And since there is no specifics given here, I think the perspective we want to look at and just say is why he took it, because the man takes and eats it. It's an act of ignorance.
Yeah.
Right. Because we know he takes it and eats it. And she says it says the man was with him. It doesn't say the man was with her. It doesn't say the man was with her the whole time. Right. Mm-hmm. The man was with her in the garden. It doesn't mean the man was with her by the tree. The man was with her when the serpent was there. I mean, people have said, well, clearly, the man must have wanted it because he didn't stop the serpent when the serpent was tempting the woman. So, except in nowhere in the story does it say the man was standing next to the woman while the serpent tempted her. It just, he was with her, right? And he is with her in the garden and all of that, and so they are a unit, I guess, in that way. They're paired together, they're one.
And that's an assumption, because the story is written specifically the way it is, and we said that the details come down to us in this particular format because it's likely the most powerful format that it could be put in, right? And so it's insignificant whether the man's standing there or not when she's tempted, because the temptation is presented to the woman, right? And the woman gives into it. That's the important. Yeah, exactly. Right. This is what a compelling temptation looks like, and we're gonna abstract it now to a feminine. This is to the feminine. Yes. That's what temptation looks like. So then, if we look at the man here, it's not. If we look at the masculine, right? Because we're saying that the man's sort of the stand-in for the masculine. The temptation is not given to the masculine, and he doesn't give into the temptation, because that's not the masculine path to sin. That's the feminine path to sin. Temptation doesn't work on the masculine perspective, but the masculine perspective has a tendency towards ignorance. He doesn't say, what is this fruit? He doesn't say, where did this come from? Doesn't say, what do you want me to eat here? Where is this from? Why do you want me to eat this? It's just ignorant. It's just, here's this fruit. Okay, I'll eat it. Right? Oh yeah. And I think if we think about the masculine instinct, when the masculine instinct is engaged,
there is much that goes unnoticed.
Mm-hmm.
That is that is very common,
Mm-hmm.
right? When the masculine instinct can lead to a focus that leads to just ignorance of things going on around them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, again, switching to, there's a reason that it's a trope in sitcom shows for the sort of the woman who is noticing things that are going on, and her husband is completely disconnected from that reality, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's watching football as the house is burning down, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that is the masculine instinct can tend towards ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, in this verse, what we're seeing here then is, okay, temptation is the feminine pathway to sin, and ignorance is the masculine pathway to sin,
Mm-hmm.
is
There's
not
yeah.
asking the question. So
I've
it's weird that one is like an overzealous pursuit of knowledge
mm-hmm.
is the pathway to sin, and the other one is decidedly not pursuing knowledge, right, is the pathway to sin. So there's some balance in the middle that is the appropriate relationship with knowledge. But yeah, that's I think what we see there.
The thing that keeps turning over my head is sins of commission versus sins of omission. And I think it's very easy, and perhaps one of the reasons why
and I don't think that's I don't think that's quite what this is getting at, but I do understand your point. Yeah.
Well, we look at the woman commits the sin and goes into it because she has a desire to do something and make something happen. Whereas the issue with the man is that he doesn't do something.
Right.
He doesn't question, or he doesn't stop, or he doesn't. I mean, regardless of your perspective on where the man is when the temptation's going on and all those things, either he doesn't intervene when it's happening, the temptation, or when he's given the fruit, he doesn't question it.
Yeah, there's some type of disinterestedness.
It's the fact that there's total inactivity on the part of the man, and there's too much activity on the part of the woman. That's not saying men are supposed to be active and women are supposed to be inactive. It's saying that the feminine will struggle with being too active, and the masculine might struggle with being completely inactive.
Right. And they're acting on their own, right? And the point that God made with the idea of splitting humanity, splitting the human into the two, and that they need to be joined together, is that they need to work together. The two need to pair together, these two things. Apologies if you hear the baby in the background. But the two need to pair together, right? And here we're seeing them sort of acting alone in a way. And that's important because that shows sort of the extremes, and that had they been working together in unison, right? Had we seen, Adam say something to the serpent, maybe that would have changed the whole dynamic, right? And that means, that doesn't just mean like in a family perspective, that also means like inside all of us, right? Because we're all at risk for both the feminine and the masculine pathways to sin, the temptation and the ignorance. And so to understand this story and this moment is important, to understand where those desires to sin come from, and that in all of us we need to be able to sort of pull on those different levers, right? That the masculine can kind of protect the feminine instinct, and then the feminine instinct can also influence the masculine, right? Perhaps the information would have been useful to share, right? Since she had knowledge of where the fruit was from, perhaps she should have offered that up. These are the things that are at play in all of us, and so we need to understand that within us, as well. But then you see also the idea of the marriage that was talked about in the previous chapter, and the man and woman coming together, in part that being related to the idea that, well, together, paired, the two of you symbolically represent and demonstrate the idea of the masculine and feminine paired and working together to set the world right, to act within God's order, right? To shape creation as the image of God. And that even if we look at it and say that is, symbolic, and there are cases where in some relationships the the woman's more masculine leaning, the man more feminine leaning. That's possible, and that can be the case. But the symbolic pairing of man and woman relates to showing the need for a balanced approach of feminine and masculine. It's like a reminder of that for us, on a daily basis, just to see those pairings in life. That is the approach we need to take, is this kind of balanced relationship of the feminine and the masculine together. So all right, any last thoughts on this, or are we good to wrap up?
I have one last thought is
Okay.
I think that pairing is contentious at times. I think it hits me as to why they need to be separate. It is because they should contend with each other.
Yes.
That's why in a marriage you want a strong partner, because you want somebody who will contend with you and show you when you're wrong. If you have any sort of sense.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be wrong, because if you're strong, if you are masculine versus feminine, if you're falling into the way it typically falls, and you're a masculine man and a feminine woman, then there's going to be both times where you're wrong. Or even if it's switched, or even if it's different balances, ideally you want to balance each other out. And that process is a contentious process.
Yes.
And it should involve contention. And what you see here is a total lack of contention.
Right.
There's no contention between the woman, no contention between the man. The woman doesn't try to convince, the man doesn't try to respond or even ask anything. There's
no challenge.
Yeah. There's no dialogue. There's nothing going on. And so, the two interacting, the balancing process functionally is involved in dialogue and contention. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we could even go to the serpent and say, the woman doesn't say, hey, dude, there's a serpent over here. Husband, come help with this,
Yeah, right.
You could even make a case that, well, like, that is, when we run across serpents, we need to access our masculine side. We need to not try to face it with our feminine side.
Yeah.
When we face those temptations, that is the time to sort of access our masculine way of thinking and fight it off, but yeah, so there's a lot to chew on there. If you have any thoughts on it, questions, that kind of stuff, we can always jump back on and examine it more if anyone's got anything they're interested in. And all these ideas, eventually I'm going to write them up as articles and pull them into a book. So this is sort of the first discussion of playing with these ideas. Eventually you'll see a more refined version, but for the sake of not making this a 3-hour episode, which I feel like we could, because there's so many little rabbit holes related to this we could go down. This is just an overview of the idea. So yeah, we'll be back next time with Genesis 3:7. Until then, be sure to like, subscribe, follow us, on the social medias where we're at. And email us unschooledtheology@protonmail.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.